Today, we are going to be talking about the Reverend Raymond Broshears. Now, Raymond Broshears is one of these guys who pops up during Garrison's investigation in 1967. And he didn't meet David Ferry or any of our known characters in New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken, until 1965. So Raymond Broshears is not in the picture in as far as the assassination goes. However, seeing as how he entered into the picture in 65 and became plugged into David Ferry's circle of people, he's an excellent witness to be able to account for various relationships. And as I've said many times before, the study of Kennedy is the study of relationships. So I'm going to give you the big picture Wikipedia explanation on who Raymond Broshears was. Raymond Broshears was a gay Pentecostal evangelist preacher and activist who founded the Lavender Panthers, an armed self-defense group for the LGBT community in San Francisco, active from the summer of 73 until the spring of 74. He also helped organize the first gay pride march in San Francisco in June 1972 and founded the Orthodox Episcopal Church of God. After enlisting in the Navy in the 1950s, Raymond Broshears was discharged for a head injury. He enrolled in the Pentecostal Robert E. Lee Bible College in Cleveland, Tennessee in the mid-50s and became a traveling preacher in the early 1960s. His advocacy efforts included fronts such as gay rights and civil rights. Broshears moved to West Long Beach, California, and established a ministry and community center on Skid Row designed to improve the quality of life for people living below the poverty line. Broshears was interviewed by the Secret Service in 1968 while he was living in Long Beach, California. The interview regarded information he knew about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. David Ferry admitted and detailed his involvement in the plot to Broshears after the two met at a bar in New Orleans in 1965 and became roommates. Ferry had fallen on tough times, having been fired from his job for homosexuality. He joined the ranks of a group with the goal of overthrowing the United States government, according to the Secret Service. It was not a voluntary decision, however, as Ferry was being blackmailed and occasionally stalked and followed. This made him extremely paranoid and anxious. This is kind of stunning for a Wikipedia page that they would have this much detail, because we're going to get to this detail over the next couple days. The plot, as described by Ferry to Broshears and later by Broshears to District Attorney Jim Garrison, was for Ferry to fly the two assassins from Houston, Texas to South Africa, as South Africa had no extradition treaties with the United States, and they could stay there relatively easily. Ferry goes on to claim that he had slept with Lee Harvey Oswald and that Oswald was set up. Ferry was paranoid, and Broshears suggested that Ferry see a psychiatrist. Broshears was then arrested by the United States Secret Service in around September of 65 after stating in front of a judge that President Johnson, who was responsible directly or indirectly for the assassination of our beloved President Kennedy, should be put to death. These comments were based on information gained from Ferry. So, there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot of fiction there, as you will see as we proceed through this set of documents on the Reverend Raymond Broshears from the Jim Garrison papers. So this here is a memorandum, August 8th, 68, to Jim Garrison from Stephen Jaffe, investigator, regarding Reverend Raymond Broshears and the Church of God of Light, Long Beach, California, 90813. At the top it says, David Ferry, Clay Shaw, and Thomas Beckham. So, if you've been following these shows over the past few weeks, you've heard me mention these odd sects of churches that seemingly went hand in hand with the alleged anti-Castro activities in the Cuban exile community down in New Orleans, right? So, you're going to have to take everything that Mr. Broshears says in these documents with a grain of salt, because he is obviously one of these odd sects of churches that the CIA was using as a money laundering operation tax-free money laundering. That's why you have people like Thomas Beckham, who's named here, who goes on to become named the Reverend Mark Evans, where he opens his own church, right? Thomas Beckham, also in Dallas on November 22nd, photographed at the airport directly behind Kennedy in Kennedy's limo. So this is going to be fun because you'll get to see a lot here. You'll get to see how David Ferry lied to Broshears about his involvement in the assassination, told him a bunch of stories. You'll get to see how Reverend Raymond Broshears is lying about his direct involvement with the CIA. And you'll get to see how the CIA was directly backing the LGBT movement in the 1960s and 70s in California. Now, why would they do that? For the same reason they're doing it today, to undermine our culture here in America. So, yes, the Raymond Broshear files, while does not directly pertain to events leading up to the assassination or the assassination itself, really kind of important in as far as establishing relationships and things that occurred after the fact that become relevant. On July 27th, 1968, at approximately 8:30 p.m., Mr. Mark Lane and myself went to visit Mr. Reverend Raymond Broshears at his Long Beach address on Orange Avenue. The myself being Stephen Jaffe, investigator. According to an arrangement made with him by telephone, we visited him to discuss his association with David Ferry, his knowledge of the assassination of President Kennedy, which he gained from David Ferry, and the television appearance he made on the Los Angeles television show called The Stan Borman Show. See the memorandum of July 10th, 68. We asked Reverend Broshears to tell us about his stay in New Orleans. Mr. Broshears said that in 1965 he came to New Orleans from East St. Louis, having worked there with the Congress of Racial Equality, under a man who was an executive in that organization named Mr. Randolph. Mr. Randolph had given him the names of several people in the organization in Bogalusa. After going to Bogalusa, Reverend Broshears had been stopped by officers from Louisiana State Patrol and interrogated. He said, "I was beat up." The Reverend Broshears came to New Orleans. Broshears stated that he came to New Orleans knowing no one here. However, he had come here to escape his problems. Mr. Broshears said that he registered at a hotel which had no name, which was across from the Continental Trailways bus station. He said after he registered under the name of Earl Raymond, Earl Raymond Allen. Shortly after his coming to New Orleans, he met David Ferry. Broshears said that he met Ferry at a bar, which was known in the French Quarter as a homosexual bar called Dixie's. He said he also associated with David Ferry at another bar known as Lafitte's in Exile. Lafitte being a reference to Jean-Pierre Lafitte, the pirate, not the alias of the French mobster / CIA operative QJ Wynn. All right, so let me see if I can start to decipher the notes in the column here. It says, Broshears reference to mail. Something in the connection is one example that he is too haywire to add up to ever being a source of evidence. So, Broshears reference to, I think it says boggy, male boggy, and the connection is but one example that he is too haywire to add up to ever being a source of evidence. Okay, so right off the bat, the first thing written in the column here is that they're saying that this guy is not going to be a good source of evidence. So, and then it says, on the other hand, Ferry seems to have reached something intimacy with him, must have had intimacy with him, I think is what he's saying, supported with the apparent use of alcohol and pills, so that's Broshears should not be totally dispensed with as a source of information and possible lead. So he's saying, despite the fact that this guy's kind of nuts, and not going to end up being a good source of anything evidentiary-wise, he'll probably be able to drop some decent nuggets of information. That's basically what I'm getting from these notes. Broshears said that he discussed the assassination of President Kennedy with David Ferry only after having known him intimately for a while. Broshears stated that Ferry had discussed with him the following names in relation to the assassination of President Kennedy and a conspiracy in which Ferry admitted his own involvement. The names were Hale Boggs, representative to Congress from state of Louisiana, Kent Courtney, financier in New Orleans, and in parentheses next to that handwritten says, does not check out. And then a couple of things I can't read, and then signed Jim Garrison. Then here's another one, Richard C. Lauchly, Lauchli, of Collingsville, Illinois. And then in the notes it says, Will No More was arrested with anti-Castro, obviously anti-Castro Cubans north of Lake Pontchartrain in late summer. Oh, so Richard Lauchly was one of the guys arrested at the raid at North Pontchartrain in the summer of '62, right? So that would make sense. That's a name being given by Broshears. And then Clay Shaw, who Ferry said had been the director of the International Trade Mart in New Orleans and was now financially responsible for Hale Boggs remaining in Congress. At that time, Broshears said, I didn't know any of these people or what the Trade Mart was. Broshears said that Ferry stayed overnight with him at his hotel room on several occasions. During one of those occasions, two men came to their door and forced their entrance to the room. They questioned Ferry, threatened Ferry, and according to Broshears, left abruptly. After these two men left, Broshears asked Ferry who they were. Ferry said, they are just two men I am afraid of. Broshears said that these men had hurriedly identified themselves, and he could not see from their identification who they were. Broshears stated that Ferry later told him that they said they were from the district attorney's office. Note, this was in 1965, which would have been way before the district attorney was even looking for Ferry. Actually, that might not be true, because in 65... No, that is true. That is definitely true. So between 63 and 65, there really was no investigation other than right after that weekend where Ferry comes back from allegedly the Winterland trip, right? So, yeah, so 65, the district attorney was not looking for Ferry, so it was not the district attorney. Broshears said that Ferry was fantastically nervous and was given to deep periods of depression. He said that it was only then Ferry drank to excess or had taken pills that Ferry would confer casually with Broshears in some of the involvement that he had with the assassination. Broshears said that he did not tell him immediately that he was involved with civil rights work, but later discussed his background. Ferry told Broshears of the mess he was in. Ferry said he was a pilot. He showed Eastern Airlines wings with his name engraved on the back to Broshears, said that he'd been fired from that organization for charges of homosexuality. Ferry stated to Broshears that he had been flying private planes to Guatemala, Costa Rica, and British Honduras. Broshears said that if this was a way to make money, Dave didn't have any. Broshears stated that he felt that Ferry had been forced to work for this organization and had been, quote, hooked into it. He said that Ferry never liked the work he was doing, but that Ferry had confided in him that he was working for, quote, a group of people who wanted to take over the United States. Okay? This I found to be particularly important. Let me read that again. Broshears stated that he felt that Ferry had been forced to work for this organization and had been hooked into it. He said that Ferry never liked the work he was doing, but that Ferry had confided in him that the work that he was working for, quote, a group of people who wanted to take over the United States. And I believe that 100%. The United States of America came to a screeching halt on November 22nd, 1963. It was overtaken by a coup led by a foreign government with the help of the CIA, the United States Mafia, and the Israeli Mossad. Okay? That is the group that has been dead set on destroying our country for the last 60 years. Those are the same people behind all this woke nonsense that we're seeing in the undermining of our culture here in America today. This is that group of people who, quote, wanted to take over the United States. Okay? Let me continue. Since Broshears felt that the homosexual underground in which he and Ferry were involved was, quote, an hysterical scene. He said that he did not take Ferry seriously. Ferry said that he was flying guns and ammunition. Ferry told Broshears that he had been stopped by British officials at a place called Belize during a regular run to a British colony in British Honduras. He told Broshears that his plane had been inspected and that the authorities there had contacted his boss in New Orleans. Ferry told Broshears that he was immediately released. He told Broshears that he flew a twin-engine plane, but that during the entire time of his work for this organization, he was not doing it voluntarily, but was being blackmailed. Broshears had nothing in the way of money, but Ferry would often give him small amounts, $20 or so, after he had gotten money by taking the St. Charles streetcar to a location which Ferry only called the agency. Ferry told Broshears in regards to President Johnson, quote, "That damn Johnson, if you knew what I knew, you'd kill the bastard." David said he killed JFK. Broshears said. Broshears asked him how he knew this, and David refused to say. David Ferry told Broshears he was to fly two men, two of the assassins who killed President Kennedy, in south of Houston out of the country. Ferry said that he was to fly from Houston with the two assassins to Central or South America, and later to Cape Town, Republic of South Africa. I have to pause right here. This is all fiction. None of this happened. None of this was supposed to happen. None of the assassins flew out of Dallas except for Jack Valente, and he did it on Air Force One. Okay? So, well, that's not completely correct. Lawrence Howard and William Seymour end up catching a CIA plane next to a viaduct in Dallas, and they end up flying to a Air Force base in New Mexico, and that is all covered in Robert Vinson's book Flight from Dallas, which I 100% agree with and would state happened with certainty, and that we'll go over another time. I'm not going to go over that today. But yeah, other than those guys, nobody fled by airplane. Everybody left in cars. So that whole story is nonsense. Ferry told Broshears that the assassins never showed up. They were supposed to have come to the Houston airport in a small aircraft after the assassination from Dallas and Fort Worth, Texas. Instead, Ferry told Broshears they tried to make it all the way over the Mexican border, and their plane crashed and burned on a sandy little islet just off Corpus Christi, Texas. Ferry said that one of the assassins, named Carlos, had directions to fly to meet him at the Houston airport, and had further directions to a bar where they were to make a contact in Central or South America. Right. So yeah, this is all fiction. Like, Ferry is making that up. The reason why I would think he made that up is because he really had a burning desire to talk to somebody about his knowledge of the assassination, but he just couldn't let it slip that he had shot Kennedy from the grassy knoll. Right, because he was the first of two shooters on the knoll, Jack Valente being the second shooter on the knoll who took off Kennedy's head, infamously in frame 313 of the Zapruder film, right? So despite David Ferry's presence on the grassy knoll, he had already started to walk off into Dealey Plaza by the time the headshot happened. So let me see. Let me continue here. Ferry told Broshears, quote, "It seems like you big money preachers are into everything. When Broshears asked him what he meant by this, he said that Billy James Hargis and another big phony up in New Jersey, Broshears said this was Dr. Carl McIntyre, were involved in the plot against President Kennedy. Ferry said that President Kennedy is the first. They're not going to stop until they kill every nigger in this country. Broshears asked who he meant by they. David Ferry said Hale Boggs and the others. He blackmails everyone. He has a blackmail file, I know. Ferry told Broshears that some other people had been killed as a result of what they knew about the assassination. He did not evidently tell Broshears who these people were. Ferry did say that if Jacqueline Kennedy or Robert Kennedy ever spoke out about the assassination, they had been warned they would be killed also. Kind of prescient in 1965. Ferry told Broshears that other people who were in Dallas had been killed. Broshears doubted what Ferry had told him. He said that Ferry ought to go see a psychiatrist. Ferry said that he knew what he was talking about. He said that there is an organization called the Central Intelligence Agency, and that one of the leaders of that organization, a man named Dulles, is not a fine man. Ferry told Broshears, quote, "They are going to turn this country into one big barbed wire prison." Let me repeat that. He said there is an organization called the Central Intelligence Agency, and that one of the leaders of that organization, a man named Dulles, is not a fine man. Ferry told Broshears, quote, "They are going to turn this country into one big barbed wire prison." Have you happened to look out your window today in 2023? Who do you think is doing this to us? The same people that killed Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, when they took control of our country. This is why Kennedy is the most important event, at least in American history, possibly world history, because November 22nd, 63 is the day the Zionists took control of our military. Okay? That's a big deal. And everything that Ferry said to Broshears that he relayed to Jim Garrison that I'm stating to you today is turned out to be 100% true. Broshears said to Ferry that everyone knows that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy. Ferry replied, "Have you ever read the Warren Report? If you do, you will see that they never looked at the evidence." Ferry said, "They murdered one of the best lays I ever had. He didn't have anything to do with President Kennedy. He was set up." Lee Harvey Oswald. Ferry told Broshears that General Walker was the military brains behind the rightist group. "There are two people in this country in New Orleans, Kent Courtney and Clay Shaw. Shaw keeps Hale Boggs in office." End quote. While on a television program in Los Angeles, California, The Stan Borman Show, July 8, 1968, Broshears stated that he had been arrested for threatening the life of President Johnson. He said that he had made the statement, "President Johnson, who was responsible directly or indirectly for the assassination of our beloved President Kennedy, should be put to death." Broshears told us that he had made these statements because of what David Ferry had told him. After he made these statements in late 1965, he was told by David Ferry, who was told by the man he knows as Clay Shaw, but then knew as Clay or Bert. In approximately September of 65, Broshears was arrested by the Secret Service agents and federal marshals and taken to the Veterans Administration Hospital in New Orleans. There he was arraigned by federal judge Christenberry in the presence of other Secret Service agents for conspiring to assassinate President Johnson. Mark Lane asked Broshears who the other co-conspirators were. Broshears said that he had made statements and discussed President Johnson in a disparaging way with four others who were also arraigned according to what he could find out. One of them, he said, was a young man from National City, although he remembered no names. During his detention in the Veterans Administration Hospital psychiatric ward in New Orleans, he was questioned by Secret Service agents Rufus Youngblood, a Mr. Sherman or Sherwood, and an agent Tom Horn, now in the Los Angeles Bureau of the Secret Service. One of those agents told Broshears, "For your own good, we're going to commit you to a federal mental institution." Broshears was then taken by Secret Service agents to Gulfport Psychiatric Hospital in October or November of 1965 and was not released until April of 1966. During Broshears' stay in the Veterans Administration Hospital in New Orleans, he was under the care of a Dr. Stone. In the middle of that stay, he was told that Dr. Stone had been taken off the case by Judge Christenberry and had been replaced by a Dr. Robinson. Broshears later found out that Stone had been transferred to the Veterans Administration Hospital in Casa Verde. After he had been transferred to the Gulfport Psychiatric Hospital, a Dr. Clark, who was in charge of Reverend Broshears, said to Secret Service agents after reviewing his case, quote, "We're not jailers, we are discharging you." Agents repeatedly questioned Broshears as to whether or not he was acquainted with David Ferry in New Orleans, and Broshears denied this acquaintance. We asked Broshears if he had ever known or heard the name Perry Russo. Broshears told us that David had talked about him many times. He said to Broshears that Russo beat him up. Ferry told him that Russo had stolen or taken $2,300 from Clay Shaw. Broshears could not exactly remember under what circumstances Perry Russo had gotten this money, but that it had to do with some sort of financial transaction and involved Mr. Shaw. After being questioned at Gulfport Hospital by Secret Service agents, one of the agents returned from Washington, D.C. and told Broshears, "You'll get a compensation pension. You will have to report to us every time you move from one city to another. If you do not do these things, you will be put in a federal jail mental institution. If you do cooperate, you will receive your compensation pension regularly." At that time, the agents gave him $1,700. Broshears believes it was either $1,300 or $1,700 as, quote, back compensation. Broshears was told by the agents never to return to New Orleans, but go back to his home. So, you don't really need much more of a confession from Mr. Broshears that he had been taking money from the CIA, right? It was either you go to the mental institution or you work for us. But I have a feeling his relationship with them started prior to David Ferrie. He didn't mistakenly bump into David Ferrie and then coincidentally go work for the CIA. Give me a fucking break. He was obviously paired with David Ferrie for one reason or another. Definitely because he was gay. But maybe he was sent to him to extract information. Who knows? The CIA, plans within plans. So Broshears was given a ticket by the agents to take a Southern Airlines flight from New Orleans to St. Louis to get his go to his cousin's farm in St. Louis and remain there. He was told to stay out of New Orleans. Broshears said that he wanted to talk with Dr. Stone in Cincinnati. He said that he purchased a Chevrolet and did visit his cousin in Coteville. He said that he crossed the bridge at New Harmony and the Indiana State Police at the border stopped him. He was questioned by police and then taken to a small cafe which Broshears called a truck stop. At that cafe, an agent of the Secret Service was waiting. Mr. Broshears could not remember whether this was Rufus Youngblood or Agent Sherwood. This was in May of 1966. The Secret Service agent asked Broshears at the cafe where he was going. Broshears told him he was going to see Dr. Stone in Cincinnati. The agent told him that he had no need to see anybody and should return immediately to his cousin's farm. The agent did ask him, however, if he was going to see David Ferrie in New Orleans, and Broshears denied that. Broshears then went to the Secret Service office in St. Louis and said that he was going to leave this part of the country and go to California. He told the agents there that he was going to San Francisco. They said that would be all right, but that he should report to a Mr. Newman at the Secret Service Bureau in San Francisco. Once in San Francisco, Broshears said that he didn't report to anyone but took an apartment in a suburb. The agents found him 1 week later at 347 Eddy Street. Newman and another agent called Hammond told him that he had violated his instructions and that he was going to be put in a hospital if he ever did anything like that again. They also told him to call the federal building twice a week. Broshears followed their instructions. In explanation of Broshears' background, he told us the following story. Broshears said that he had been living in 1964 at Belleville, East St. Louis. Homer Randolph, head of the Congress of Racial Equality there, was Broshears' superior in civil rights work. Remember, civil rights work, a.k.a. CIA, right? In Belleville, Broshears said an all-white city, the territorial border had been reconstructed so as to keep the Negro section out of the city. Broshears had announced publicly that he was going to stage a sit-in in a restaurant in East St. Louis. This was printed in the East St. Louis Journal, and the sit-in was scheduled for November 11th on Veterans Day. Mayor Nichols of that city had Broshears arrested and taken to him. He told Broshears that their city was a nice German-Dutch heritage town, and we must stop you from making a mistake. Present at that meeting were the Justice of the Peace and the Chief of Police. Broshears was told not to stage the sit-in. On November 10th, the morning before the sit-in was scheduled, Broshears was arrested again, taken into custody, and he was threatened by the chief of police that he would be put in prison. He said that he had not broken any law, but the police stated that they were aware of the laws he had broken. On November 11th, Reverend Broshears staged the sit-in that he had planned. At 7:30 a.m. on November 12th, Broshears was arrested and taken to the chief of police. He was charged with the sexual molestation of a young boy. Broshears phoned his superior, Mr. Randolph, and Mr. Randolph told him not to say anything or sign anything. Randolph said that he would not get hold of an attorney, or said that he would get a hold of an attorney who was a friend named Roy Cohn. Okay? Roy Cohn. Do you know the name of Roy Cohn? Roy Cohn was Trump's lawyer in the 1980s. Roy Cohn was also a member of the board of directors of the company Permindex. And he seemingly was directly connected to CIA cooperations with the Secret Service dating back to 1960, 1965. So, Broshears was charged with sexual molestation of a boy 17 years old named William Gorgeous Broshears. Said that this boy had come to the door of his apartment on November 8th. The boy had asked him to help with the religious and sexual problems which he said he had. Reverend Broshears stated that he had talked with the boy but had never touched him in any way. Broshears said that the charge had been filed and according to the records was recorded at 10:30 a.m. on the 10th of November, which was before his arrest and before the sit-in, which he staged on the 11th. Broshears said that the chief of police said, "Boy, we are your friends, and we're going to make it easy on you. Sign this paper, you'll get 2 days in jail, and we'll let you go." Half an hour later, they brought him a statement to sign. It was a statement of admission to the charges. Broshears signed that paper without having been recontacted by Mr. Randolph or the attorney. Broshears said that he had originally refused to sign the paper until the policemen who were speaking to him brought in a copy of the newspaper, which had a headline, quote, "Belleville Minister Arrested Sexual Perversion Charges." Broshears became hysterical and signed all of the papers which the officers requested. 15 minutes later, Mr. Randolph came with Mr. Cohn. Both said that they knew that he had been forced to sign the paper, but that nothing could be done at this time. Broshears was in Menard State Penitentiary for the following 6 months. Broshears said that after he was discharged, he went to New Orleans and worked at a carnival under the name Raymond Allen. Okay, so he worked at a carnival, okay? If you'll remember, well, actually, you shouldn't remember because we never talked about it, but Larry Crawford, who was a friend of Jack Ruby's, who worked at the Carousel Club, also connected to Jack Ruby's brother Earl Ruby, and most likely worked at Earl Ruby's washateria up in Detroit. So Larry Crawford was most certainly low-level CIA. He had been working the carnival circuit. And the carnival circuit, you have to remember, these traveling carnivals and ice-capades, like with the Winterland stuff we talked about, and Humble Oil. Like, the CIA utilized all of these traveling companies to facilitate child trafficking, drug smuggling, weapon smuggling, you name it, right? So whenever you come across people talking about working at the carnival circuit here in New Orleans or anywhere, what you're talking about are fronts for CIA smuggling and trafficking. Been going on forever, man. Ever. Since 47. All right, so where was I? Broshears said that after he was discharged, he went to New Orleans and worked at a carnival under the name Raymond Allen. At the carnival, he was known as Corky. Broshears said that he could not find any other employment as a result of his prior arrest and incarceration. Broshears said that he went to work for an organization called Deacons for the Defense of Justice in Bogalusa, Louisiana. When we asked Reverend Broshears if he felt that David Ferry worked for, quote, Deacons of Defense and Justice, and then it cuts off. As a result of his appearance on the Los Angeles television program on the 8th of July, 1968, Broshears was visited by the Secret Service agent Tom Horn. Broshears was told that he would lose his pension if he appeared on another such television program. Broshears was again threatened by Horn and was told that he would end up in Alameda Bay if he did not keep his mouth shut. Broshears said that he was in constant touch with Agent Joe Conlin from the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Long Beach. He also said that he was in touch with a Lieutenant John Cowan of the Long Beach Police Department and also Sergeant Charles Usery of that police department. Sergeant Usery, according to Broshears, has knowledge about the murder of a reporter which took place in Long Beach Huntington Police Department. That reporter's name was Bill Hunter from Dallas, Texas. Ooh, that's an interesting little tidbit. Wonder if there's any significance there. 2 Long Beach Police Department intelligence detectives have also befriended Broshears for the purpose, he believes, of keeping an eye on him. These are Gary Coven and John Owen, right? So this guy, the Reverend Raymond Broshears, a one-man church, is in with every single law enforcement agency in every city he contacts, right? Police, FBI, Secret Service. This guy, as you'll see, much like Jules Rico Kimball, was a fink for the feds, okay? That's what these guys did. The underlying job had to have come from the CIA because they are the glue that holds everything together, right? They are the ones who got their hands dirty in the trenches and recruited these fucking scumbags. All right. So in the column here on the left, it mentions something about Beckham, which is David Beckham, who goes on to become AKA Mark Evans. Can't really determine what it says there, but let me continue reading. It says, when we asked if Reverend Broshears knew Dr. Thomas Beckham, and he's not a doctor, it was a fake doctor's certificate that he got from Fred Chrisman, which came from Jack Martin's fake diploma mill. These guys, I swear. Dr. Thomas Beckham, Broshears stated that he did indeed know Dr. Beckham and that he had corresponded with Dr. Beckham and produced a photograph of Beckham in which he was shown as an entertainer. The personal management office of Beckham was listed under the name of Fred Lee Chrisman. That's hilarious. Fred Lee Chrisman was a CIA employee, okay? Not a contract agent like Clay Shaw. CIA employee. On the books, Social Security number, whole 9 yards, right? He's one of the guys who was involved in some of the 1950s, or I forget exactly the date, but there was some incident up in like Portland or Washington State where Fred Lee Chrisman claimed that he was a witness to aliens landing and stuff. Really hilarious. This goes to show some of the early attempts at false flags by the CIA involving the UFOs way back in the day. But yeah, look up Fred Lee Chrisman. You'll find some funny stuff on him. But they're talking about Beckham, and Beckham's important because he was a low-level guy who was, I think he was in the Marines, same time Oswald. I think he knew Oswald, and definitely knew Oswald in New Orleans, unless he knew Kerry Thornley and not Oswald, which is another goddamn good possibility. So remember, like, nobody knew Oswald except for Kerry Thornley and Clay Shaw. I can't put the real Oswald in the company of anyone else in New Orleans at all. So, all right, where are we? Other information which Broshears gave us in response to several questions was, A, Broshears had been extremely upset because Agent Rufus Youngblood of the Secret Service office had told him in the last week of March 1966 that David Ferrie was dead. This was before Broshears left Gulfport Hospital. Youngblood had told him that David Ferrie had committed suicide and that therefore it would be not necessary for Broshears to ever try to find Ferrie again. It was not until just prior to our meeting on Wednesday, July 23rd, 68, that Broshears had learned of Ferrie's death in January of 67. Broshears said that he had obviously been told falsely that Ferrie had died by Agent Youngblood. That's pretty significant. Broshears said that David Ferrie had friends and family in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's true. We explained that Garrison's investigation had not begun until November of 66, and that therefore the men who had represented themselves as being from the district attorney's office in 65 had represented themselves falsely. Broshears said these weren't Garrison's men in David's hotel room. Broshears asked us if we knew the name Robert Duvall, spelling unsure. He said David flew him to one of the Central American countries. He was sexually intimate with him. David Ferrie told Broshears that Lee Harvey Oswald had been a bisexual. Now remember, you have to keep every one of these statements about Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans with a grain of salt, because I'm convinced the vast majority of Oswald sightings and interactions and things said about Oswald pertaining to New Orleans were actually referring to Kerry Thornley. I don't really think Oswald did anything at all, ever. He was busy doing other things that were legitimate, like spy work, I guess you could say, for the FBI or whomever. And he was not even in the States most of the time, or not even in Dallas or wherever he was supposed to be. I think they were intentionally keeping him out of the area so he could be impersonated by Kerry Thornley, primarily in New Orleans, and William Seymour, primarily in Dallas. And that's how they were able to create the Oswald myth, because you can't really have your guy running around creating his own stories while you're trying to create myths about him, right? So one day Oswald will be cracked. One day the truth of Oswald will be told. Probably not by me. Broshears had seen an identification bracelet with the name Lee on it, and also a gray or beige hunter's hat, which was in possession of David Ferrie. Ferrie had told Broshears that Officer Tippett was sent to murder Lee Harvey Oswald because Lee Harvey Oswald had infiltrated a cell for the FBI. Ferrie told Broshears that Oswald had gone to Russia in connection with work for the FBI. Ferrie also told Broshears that the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI hated each other and worked against each other. That is clearly false, since you see the FBI covering for the CIA constantly in the Kennedy files. Ferrie told Broshears that 3 people worked in the Texas School Book Depository and composed the cell, which had been infiltrated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Again, false. Broshears said that one of their names was Bob, but that he did not know the last name. Ferrie had told Broshears that Jack Ruby was also involved with these people who worked in the Texas School Book Depository. That I believe. It was Bob, according to Ferrie, that was supposed to kill Oswald in the book depository. Okay, that's a whole bunch of fiction, because we know the shooters in the book depository were Lawrence Howard and Lauren Hall on the 6th floor and Sergio Arcacha on the roof. And so they had come in the building between 12:10 and 12:15, probably just past 12. Okay, when they cleared everyone out of the building to go out front to stand there to watch the motorcade. Why do you think they cleared out the building? They had to clear out the building so that they could let the assassins in the back door, take the elevators up to the 6th floor. Then Sergio Arcacha takes the fire escape up to the roof, where he left a Mauser 7.65, which was pointed out in Gary Shaw's book. What was it called? Oh, it's going to drive me nuts. I'll remember by the time the show's over. But yeah, clearly in that book, it states that a Mauser 7.65 was found on the roof of the depository, and that the Dallas police even commented on it and stated that it was left there by a security guard. Nonsense. There were no security guards, okay? So then when you trace the movements of everybody and then down through Galveston and whatnot, it becomes pretty obvious that it was Sergio Arcacha on the roof. And so the story here told by David Ferry to Broshears is clearly an exaggeration. Ferry told Broshears that he had met Jack Ruby in New Orleans. Definitely. Reverend Broshears gave Mark Lane a better see attached, which requests that Mark Lane visit and consult with him in the event that he is ever arrested or taken into custody or placed in an institution. All right. So now we have, it seems, a letter. In the letterhead, Church of God of Light, a Lighthouse of Truth, Long Beach, California, Reverend Raymond Broshears' fake church. To Mark Lane from Reverend Raymond Broshears. And the letter says, Sir, should I at any time become ill or I am jailed for any reason, at whatever location, I sincerely request that you and your designated representative please come visit me, no matter how critical the illness or serious the situation. So, yes, Broshears getting scared. All right, now we have another interview of Raymond Broshears, conducted by Louis Ivan and James Alcock, labeled Broshears number 4, August 8th, 1968. Reference, David Ferry, Clay Shaw, Kerry Thornley. There we go, Kerry Thornley. Thomas Beckham and the Cubans. All right, so I knew Kerry Thornley's name would come up into this. All right, so it's a question and answer. So I'm just going to call out the question and answer them. State your name on the tape recorder. Raymond Broshears. How did you meet Martin? Martin's been in for so long. Nebraska's used to him. Don't know who he's talking about yet. Raymond Broshears. Why don't you tell us when you arrived in New Orleans in 1965? Answer, it was shortly thereafter I left the Bogalusa demonstrations down there. I got stopped by one of the Louisiana state troopers. I was doing civil rights work in Bogalusa. I was with the Congress of Racial Equality at that time. I came down here. I was still in bad shape from having when I was here before and when I got stopped. And I come on down to New Orleans because I didn't know anywhere else to go. I was waiting for a contact from a Mr. Farmer from New York City. Mr. Farmer was supposed to be in New Orleans at the time. So I was here, and this was in August. And this was in August, right after the 1st of August, and I gravitated into your underground down here because I didn't have any money so to speak. I arrived at the Continental Trailways bus depot over on Tulane at the time. I assume it's still there. And there was a little hotel, and that's all the sign out in front was hotel. And it was just down the street from it. And I figured with a sign like that, it had to be a cheap place, so I got a place at the cheap hotel. And I got it under the name Earl Raymond Allen, not Raymond Broshears, because I had gotten into a little bit of trouble up north doing civil rights work under the name Raymond Broshears, and I was pretty upset. I didn't know which way to turn. I had lost the church, lost the family, everything over it, so I thought I'd go back to Earl Raymond Allen. Earl Raymond Allen is the name I was born with. My mother was, in one of her mad moments, had changed it to one of her many mad husbands. So he was born Earl Raymond Allen, and then changed his name to Raymond Broshears, or his mother did at least. But in reality, does anybody use a completely different name, aka an alias, other than the CIA? Nope. What is this name? It's Earl Raymond Allen. Earl Raymond Allen? All right. And Ray Allen and Al is the name that I circulated here in the New Orleans area in that certain short period of time. And I met a lot of people here, a lot of strange people. And I guess one of the strangest people I ever met, what I considered to be very frightened later, I now consider him to be a very frightened person. At the time, I considered him to be a very promiscuous person by the name of David Ferry. As it turns out, as it turns out to be David Ferry, because the picture and the hair and everything and the age all correlates to the same David. But then later on, I saw his wings from Eastern Airlines, which was engraved on the back, and it said David Ferry. This was not right off. He didn't come out and say, "See, my name's David Ferry." Where did you meet him? At Dixie's over at Lafitte's. Was he with anyone when you first met him? A couple of young boys. I'd say they were too young to be in a bar. Just hustlers trying to make their way, And they sure aren't going to make it with him. I found that out. He didn't have a penny. He didn't have penny one, except at times he would come up with a few pennies, but he didn't have much in the way of money, because he didn't have any money. Now, this is what I found out to be very strange, because Mr. Lane told me the other day when he came to my home. Reverend Broshears, who was the man there? That's David Ferry. Laughter. I'm sorry, it's rather a bad picture. He doesn't look too bad when he's made up, I mean, he's passable. Did you ever get arrested for a charge of conspiring against President Johnson for the statement you made? Yes, I did. I was arrested. I was told I was going to be arrested by his friend Bert. He said that I was in trouble because I had been blabbing my mouth. By whose friend? David Ferry's? Dave's, who I had earlier been introduced to as Clara and also Clay. So Clay Shaw used a homosexual alias of Clara. Interesting. The last name was never given. I was told I was one of the wealthiest men in New Orleans and could buy and sell people. Is this a photograph of the man you knew as Bert? That's a photograph of him. His hair seems to be a little fuller at the top, and then it was on top. And then it was on top at the time. He had his hair cut a little closer to that at that particular time. Do you recognize the man in this photograph? That's Bert. That's the man who was identified to me as Bert. And how was he introduced to you? The first time he was at Dixie's, he had been at Lafitte's, and then he came over to Dixie's, and he said, this is when he made a remark to me I didn't like. What was the remark? He said something about he liked butch people or something of that nature. You all wouldn't understand that kind of language anyhow. Anyhow, he made me a kind of remark, and I let it be known that I didn't like the man, and he kept buying drinks for people and don't like people who have money to go around trying to buy people. And this obviously is what that man did. He tried to buy everything. Can you identify the man in this photograph? That's David Ferry. And this photograph? I would say that looks like David, but boy, that's a lousy shot. That sure looks like him. And this photograph? That is Bert. What happened when you were arraigned, and were you arraigned? And where were you arraigned? Well, anyhow, I was told I was going to be arrested by the FBI for threatening the life of the president. And I hadn't really threatened the life of the president, except to a lot of, this man had heard it, and so had David and anyone who was around in the bars, and I really didn't threaten his life, and I met some people who claimed that they wanted Johnson dead too. And let's get together and do something, and we never really got together to do anything. Except I had met other people who didn't particularly care for Mr. Johnson in the past. Not here, out in National City. A boy out in National City who really has a passion to kill Mr. Johnson. I mean, that was his driving thing. He was to come out here to New Orleans because I called him, and he came out here to New Orleans. What was the statement you had made that led to your arrest? I don't know which one, but they claimed that they had 2 letters to my grandmother, a letter to my mother in which I had made statements to her, and this I will never believe in 10,000 years, that I sent a card to Mr. Johnson himself. I don't believe that. Now, gentlemen, I'm sorry. I do not believe that. I, even in my maddest moment, could have been crazy enough to send a card directly to the president and signed with my own name, because if you're going to kill somebody, you don't write them ahead of time and let them know about it. I'm sorry, but I had made some threatening remarks. There's no doubt about that. So on the last night before, David said he was going to fly out at 12:30 and wanted to know if I wanted to go with him. I wasn't particularly wild about going with him. I thought it would be good that he just wasn't going directly down to Cape Town. He was going to straight to Central America. He wasn't going to Cape Town, which is where I wanted to go because they speak English down there and it's more American type country. And he left and he came back with this huge and these things, And so we met Bert later up at Bourbon Street, and Bert gave him this huge envelope. It was something like an X-ray envelope. You know how big those are? Those are huge. And a smaller envelope attached to the outside, and it was a large brown envelope about that size. But anyhow, this envelope, they reiterated that I better get out of town and that the FBI was going to arrest me. Well, I never even went back to the hotel. What did you do at that time? David told me that Bert said I was going to be arrested. I never even went back to the hotel. David reached in the envelope and took out 2 $20 bills and said, here, this will tide you over. and hide until I get back. And he said, don't hide here in New Orleans. He said, when I get back, meet me down at Lafitte's. But he didn't say when or anything. So I figured, God, I was feeling so paranoid. Here I am in a southern city like New Orleans. I got the civil rights thing on me, and these people down here don't particularly like people who work for civil rights. And now this guy says I'm in trouble. Dave says I'm in trouble, and this other guy says the FBI is going to arrest me for threatening his life of the president, so which there's no doubt that I have. So I didn't know what to do, and I'm a disabled veteran, so the nearest thing I figured that I would have immunity there. No one could touch me in a VA hospital, in a federal hospital. Well, I was almost right. I had a very difficult time getting in. They wasn't going to admit me at first, and then I said I was going to kill myself, and the doctor said, that's nice, go right ahead and do it. I had a terrible time convincing them, so finally I had to go out, and that got me in. I thought I had made it. What happened then? There was a real fine doctor up there, a Dr. Stone, a heavyset man, short. I think he took a little too many mints, but that was fine, let me tell you. And Dr. Stone told me 2 days after I had been there that he said, there's a couple of men here to see you. They identified themselves from the U.S. Marshal's office, and I said, what for? He said, you have written threatening letters to the president, and you are wanted on this charge. And it's a very serious charge, threatening the life of the president. And I said, Dr. Stone, I've said a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever said anything more than anybody else has ever said. And he said, well, if you don't want to talk to them, you don't have to. And he saw to it that I didn't have to talk to them for several days. And then Dr. Stone suddenly wasn't there. He didn't come in, and this Dr. Robinson, who was his assistant, who was at Tulane University, a psychiatrist at Tulane University on their staff, or a teacher or something there. All I remember was that something at Tulane University. This Dr. Robinson took over my case because Dr. Stone had suddenly been transferred to Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, I had seen Dr. Stone the day before, and he was talking about helping me get out of this mess, and he wasn't going to Cincinnati or anything. And all of a sudden, the next morning, here comes this Robinson walking in. He said, you're my patient. I go out in the day room, threw me down, stripped me bare, had me in cuffs, and put pajamas on me, and I was in a room like you wouldn't believe. Just a mattress on the floor. Just a light on the ceiling. What town was that in? New Orleans, Louisiana, in the U.S. Naval Hospital, right here. What name were you in the hospital under? Earl Raymond Allen. But I believe Dr. Stone got the other name, Raymond Broshears, because that's what my C file was under, Broshears. And that's what the first time they came in contact me with under the other name. Could I ask you a question? On July 8th, were you on the Stan Foreman television program in Los Angeles? And when you were asked what the statement was you had made that got you arrested, instead, I stated that Mr. Johnson, the person who was responsible directly or indirectly for the assassination of our beloved President Kennedy, should be put to death. Yes, I made that statement in front of Judge Christenberry, in that so-called, I don't know what it was, indictment, trial, commitment, whatever it was, I made it in there. That's a statement that is officially attributed to me. He said, David Ferry discussed the assassination of President Kennedy with you? Not right off, but as you got to know him, yes, of course. You know, in the homosexual underworld, everybody likes to make themselves out to be something more than what they are. Okay, let me stop right there, because that is also a direct quote from the JFK film when they made up the character of Willie O'Keefe. Do you remember Willie O'Keefe, played by Kevin Bacon? That's not a real person. That's a compilation of people. That's a combination of Perry Russo, Reverend Raymond Broshears, and there was one other person who they got information from. I don't recall. But that character is a compilation of characters. And this is a direct quote. Not right off, but as I got to know him, yes. Of course, you know, everyone in the homosexual underworld, everybody likes to make themselves out to be something more than what they are. That's the line from the movie. Direct from Kevin Bacon. So, yeah. You know, real important, especially the more they're hitting the skids and deeper down they're going, the more important they like to make themselves, I feel. Of course, this doesn't have to just be homosexual underworld. In any facet of life, people on the skids like to make themselves out to be more important. And as I told Mr. Lane, I just talked. I didn't pay any attention to him, and I was really riding him over it, you know. The more I did this, the more he said. Was that the first thing about David Ferry that he started to talk to you about the assassination? He told me that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill the President Kennedy. And I said that a lot, you know, about it. And he said, I know, I'll have to, you know, he said, in starting. And he then proceeded to tell me about he was to fly he specified 2 of the assassins. He didn't say there were 2 or 1. He said 2 of the assassins. He said, I was flying of the killers from south of Houston on down through Central and South America into the Republic of South Africa because they have no extradition treaty there because they'll be safe. And he says, proceeds to go on. I still think it's some kind of cock and bull story because it's just a little bit too big for me to, and then something is redacted. Trying to tie Hale Boggs, the congressman here in Louisiana, trying to tie him with Billy James Hargis and General Walker and H. Lamar Hunt and this guy in New Jersey, McIntyre. He was tying them all together. He said it's part of the great white Anglo-Saxon Protestant plot to take over this country. Ha ha! That's hilarious. Because we all know whose plot it is to take over this country. I really couldn't buy it from then, and I still have I'm not having as hard a time buying it. I'll be honest with you. I'm not having as hard a time buying it now as I did then. All right, and so let me pause because there's some notes in the column here. Let me go ahead and read these notes. It says, note, even if everything Broshears recalls is truly what Ferry told him, it appeared that Ferry is giving him some garbage from time to time, to say the least, and this paragraph may be a good example. Well, yes and no, right? He's definitely feeding him some garbage, but he's tying in some names that have some real substance here. This information always has a grain of truth. Remember that. What did he say specifically about Hale Boggs and his involvement? Well, he said Hale Boggs, he mentioned the only time he used the name Clay Shaw, he mentioned Clay Shaw keeps Hale Boggs in Congress. After this was several days after our first meeting. He said Clay Shaw keeps Hale Boggs in Congress. I found that interesting. I know some wealthy businessmen who do keep congressmen in office by keeping the money going. And then Hale Boggs, I don't know, and then Mr. Lane tells me that Hale Boggs was on the Warren Commission. And I don't know. I had just done what I had been told. I stayed out of everything when I was told David Ferry had killed himself. This was in March of '66. I just accepted it as such and then went on, and they met me here at the airport, put me on a Delta Airlines for St. Louis, and went to my cousin's farm. Who was it that told you that David Ferry killed himself in March of '66? Who was it that put you on that airplane? The man that put me on the airplane, I don't know who he was. He just flipped out a badge, and it was a Secret Service badge, you know? You know, they got those little cowboy-like badges, you know? They just told me that the agreement was that I would leave Gulfport and that I would not come back to New Orleans. Well, they sold me over there. Sherman had told me there was no good for me to go back to New Orleans because my friend was dead. He had killed himself. Who told you? Sherman. Who's Sherman? Well, I understand he's Secret Service. He said he's dead. And I was quite physically shook about it. A lot of things going on through my mind. I wanted to see Dr. Stone again, and I remember that Dr. Robinson said he was in Cincinnati. So I got up to Cincinnati and reported to the Secret Service and everything. Then I decided to go to Cincinnati. And I started to drive there, and I never got there. I was met at the Indiana State line at the Harmony Bridge by the Indiana State Police, and I was taken to a cafe up the road, and there I was talked to. By whom? By two Secret Service men. Do you remember their names? Sherwood. Sherwood? Sherman. Did you ever meet Secret Service agent by the name of Rufus Youngblood? I met Rufus Youngblood here in New Orleans. I met Rufus Youngblood. I have been thinking very seriously about it. Was not Rufus Youngblood at New Harmony. I get him mixed up with this Sherwood. It was not Rufus Youngblood. So first he claims to know Rufus Youngblood, then he says he doesn't. So whenever guys backtrack like this, they're just lying, right? So I don't think, because here's the thing, you know, Broshears was not involved in the assassination, but he's scared to death because he's CIA, he's funded, and then he gets mixed up with people who were involved with the assassination. He's freaking out. He doesn't know what the fuck to do, right? So he keeps checking in with Secret Service because he's afraid, probably because he's afraid of the CIA. Then he probably checks in with the FBI because he's afraid of the Secret Service. This is a guy in sheer panic for a long fucking time. Hey, you know, you fuck around, you find out. That's what you get when you make deals with the CIA, you know? When you lie with dogs, you get fleas. Well, Sherwood came over. There had been numerous people from Washington because Clark said, we're not jailing him. If you want him in jail, put him in jail. This is a hospital. If you want him out, put him out. We don't have any bed space. So Youngblood had been over there. Youngblood told me he was dead. Sherwood told me he was dead. And this other guy, Calcott of the FBI, it seems like there was a cot at the end of his name. And he said, and something is redacted here, your friend is dead, your friend David. This was in 1966. So when I was met over at the Indiana State line, they asked me where I was going, and I said I'm going to Cincinnati. Now I don't think anymore about this, and I'm sure that my cousin Virginia called the St. Louis office and told them where I was going. When David Ferry told you that Clay Shaw had been keeping Hale Boggs in Congress, Did he tell you who Clay Shaw was or what he did? He told me he was a wealthy financier, and he was one of the wealthiest men in New Orleans. He had mentioned a connection. He then mentioned a connection between the man Kent Courtney, and then also told me that he was had flown one trip with somebody named Richard Lochley, whom I later learned a bit about. Do you know about Richard Lochley? I had met him at the Stoveworks at Collinsville, Illinois, after I went back to Coulterville, Illinois. I had never been to Coulterville before. I should say that after my cousin left Illinois. Shortly thereafter, when I was told to go west, this young man left and I went to San Francisco, talking about himself. And there I remained in comparative safety and silence because it does feel kind of good to have all that money coming in every month. Okay, so he's got a CIA pension for keeping his mouth shut. At the same time, he's out there leading the gay rights movement in San Francisco and Long Beach. Go fuck yourself. This is CIA operations. This is CIA funded sexual undermining of our fucking culture going back to 1960 fucking 5. Breaks my fucking heart. Did Dave Ferry ever talk to you about Perry Raymond Russo? Yes. He never did say, not all the names you're running off here, just Perry Russo. He mentioned the name Russo and called him numerous names, but I strongly suspect there was something there I would only be projecting. Did David Ferry ever mention Russo in connection with Clay Shaw? For example, in an earlier interview I had with you, you told me that Russo was somehow involved in either taking money from Shaw, and he cuts him off, but that is yet to be determined. That is only what David said. What did he say? He said something about it, but the point was not too clear. He had a distinct, he was very upset with Russo, but I know he got money from. I can't remember 3 years is a long time for something that is, to me, insignificant. Insignificant for the fact that I had accepted the Warren Report. Who said that? I had accepted the Warren Report. Had you ever read it? No, but after what Mr. Lane had said the other day, a good cause. If the Warren Commission doesn't even look at the evidence, well, how can it possibly be a reliable report? What did Ferry do as an occupation? Well, he claimed that he was a private detective, something which I very seriously doubt. He doesn't look the role of a private detective. He doesn't talk the role of a private detective at all in my book. That's all right. I humored him. You humor a lot of people, but I don't think he was a private detective myself. He also told me about his trips and how he made his money. Now he told me that he started working for the government. Now this is the only thing that really has concerned me now. He told me they started working for the government, but now he later learns that they are not really working for the government. They're working against the government. And that's why he was in the condition he was in. They're working against the government. That's why he was in the condition he was in. He told me there were films taken of him and a 16-year-old boy engaged in a homosexual act here in New Orleans, and he told me that this is punishable in the state of Louisiana by life imprisonment. I don't know your laws here on that particular subject, but this is what he told me. This to me, in view of his condition, poverty condition, this accounts to me why he didn't have any money. Because he was really making these trips almost for free. Can you see what was going on with David Ferry going back long before the Kennedy assassination? He was a homosexual, therefore he was easily subjected to blackmail, therefore he was easily controllable and manipulatable. You think they didn't have blackmail on Clay Shaw too? They keep blackmail on everybody. Even the guy in charge, I'm sure. This paragraph is really fundamental in understanding the pressures that were on Ferry. Not that he was ever a fucking good guy. Make no mistake about it. He was a pedophile and a total shitbag human being. Nonetheless, he did what he did with Kennedy because he had no choice. Not that he had any love for Kennedy, but he had been being blackmailed for a long time. What were these trips? What was he doing? He told me that he had made trips down to, he mentioned to me very specifically, Guatemala and British Honduras, and Honduras and Belize is one of the cities he said that he likes. How do you spell Belize? Belize, but this is one of the cities that he liked. I believe it's British. It's a British city. He told me that he flew arms, and this was the first time that Lochley came into it, but he never mentioned what his role was. Did he ever say how he got paid for these flights that he made? As I told you many times before, he never mentioned any payment. He was always drunk, and this was why he mentioned those films. He indicated that he was being blackmailed for these films. This is why it didn't cost somebody to make those flights. Except as I told you, he would take the St. Charles streetcar and come back with money from time to time. And on one occasion, he went over to this place, the building I identified, which you say is on Camp Street, I believe, and he got money there. The building you identified was 544 Camp Street. That's Guy Bannister's address. You told me that he was supposedly worked there for a detective company. That was the photograph I showed you. So, I need to reiterate. Lee Harvey Oswald did not ever step foot in 544 Camp Street, okay? The only reason we ever connected Lee Harvey Oswald to 544 Camp Street was because Kerry Thornley screwed up when he picked up the flyers from Douglas Jones at Jones Printing and handed them to Lee Harvey Oswald to hand out on the street corner, right? Kerry Thornley was actively working as a handler of Lee Harvey Oswald. He had the flyers printed from Jones Printing by Douglas Jones. He gave the name Leon Osborne. Okay, Leon Osborne as the name that the work was done under. And it is this connection from 544 Camp Street to Kerry Thornley, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Not Lee Harvey Oswald, okay? Kerry Thornley was the person who was seen there and identified as Oswald. 100%. 100%. I don't believe that Oswald ever stepped foot at 544 Camp Street. The Oswald that you know is literally a CIA construct. So, moving on. The building that you identified was 544 Camp Street. You told me that he was there working at a detective company. That was the photograph I showed you. Yes, afterwards you told me that was where he worked as a detective, but I still don't believe he's a detective because I understand detectives are licensed by the city here, and the city they have to be licensed, and I doubt that he was a licensed detective here. I don't know. He did work for a private detective here. But you don't have any license to really be a genuine private detective. Yes, but you can work for them without a license. He wasn't a private detective, Mr. Alcock. Did he ever mention the Central Intelligence Agency or any words to that effect? The agency. He mentioned the agency. That is what he worked for. When he went on these on the St. Charles streetcar, did he ever speak about where he was going? He mentioned that he would get money from someone in the agency. He never used the word Central Intelligence. And I have since learned, since meeting with Steve and Mr. Lane, and I have talked with John. John has told me, and of course, I have met this man, but I didn't know who he was nor what he was with before. Now he's supposed to be a respectable contractor. I really don't know if he is or not, but I know he's quite wealthy and has a quite fancy home in Long Beach, but this man is, what is his name? You'd rather not say? I would only say that under subpoena anyhow. This man told me that he used to be with him. He now admits he used to be with and said he was an electrician, a member of the OSS. So what he's talking about now is he's talking about a guy that he knew in Long Beach who was obviously having an affair with Clay Shaw. This is the implications that I'm getting from this. And they always refer to it as the agency. And this is the last telecast because this man became very upset and did not want to say anything to me more because he felt it was not in my best interest because Mr. Garrison was a man who had been proved by the government to be mentally ill. And he said this man will do anything and he says he will not stop short of murder. This was that man you'd rather not mention. Then also John told me about this Mr. Ball, you know. What did he say about that? Oh, you know, just telling me to lay off. You know, Ball being the lawyer for the Warren Commission. Just telling me to lay off. You know, it would be better for everyone if I just let sleeping dogs lie. Then the man rest in peace. He's dead. Everyone else is gone. I didn't know. He later told me who Mr. Ball is. He's out there in Long Beach, and he's an attorney in Long Beach, and he's not a very famous attorney in Long Beach, at least not until Steve told me that. You're talking about Joseph Ball. Yeah, Joseph Ball. You said he was on the Warren Commission. I think you said he was on the Warren Commission, was he? Yes, he was, as counsel. He was an attorney for the Warren Commission. You never heard anything about him in Long Beach? He definitely lives there, or John would not have told you that. He's not in the news because I've never heard of him. Of course, we don't hear many of our lawyers in Long Beach. End of the first side of the tape. All right, let me see how long we've been going here. About an hour and 9 minutes. Okay, I'll go for a little bit longer. All right, so question. That the assassins were supposed to fly out of Dallas. What did he say happened? They were supposed to fly between Fort Worth and Dallas. He did not specify an airfield because a single engine, I have since talked with Mr. Lane, any single engine plane can take off. It doesn't have to be from an airfield. And he says that Carlos was a lousy damn pilot. Carlos, he says he can't fly worth a shit. Did he say Carlos was one of the... Yes, Carlos was one of the assassins. Bullshit. And Carlos didn't fly worth a shit, and they were supposed to fly him where he'd have a twin-engine plane. He said he'd have a twin-engine plane. Where was that supposed to be? South of Houston? South of Houston. He said they didn't do it. They flew right down to Mexico and said that they crashed off Corpus Christi. Did he say what Carlos' last name was? I can't swear to that, I'm sorry. What was this crash? Was this recorded? Yes, the government certainly knew about it because the Naval Air Base in Corpus Christi, they cleaned it all up. David said at the time there was some information about it, but Steve tells me that Mr. Lane tells me there was no evidence of it. That is correct. There's no evidence of it because it didn't happen. It's fiction. Did the plane crash close to Corpus Christi? Off of it on an island, off a sandy island off of Corpus Christi? Was it recorded in the Corpus Christi papers that day? Steve said he checked the Corpus Christi papers and it's not there. I said that we had somebody try to check the Corpus Christi papers and they couldn't find it. Did he say exactly what day it was that the plane crash took place? The same day, November 22nd, 1963. Yes. Did he say who the other man was in the plane crash with Carlos? A Caucasian. What was Carlos? He was Spanish. He was a Cuban exile. He did say he had ever known these two men before. Yes. Did he say where? Here in New Orleans. Okay, so the only real Carlos that comes up in the assassination literature is Carlos Quiroga. Yet, I don't really have a place for him in the assassination story other than being one of the guys who was definitely with CIA, but he was, loosely connected to all these guys. Definitely not in Dallas. Like, people put such a heavy emphasis on Carlos Quiroga. But here's the fucking problem. When you figure out who the shooters are, and then you reverse engineer the connections from the shooters back to Clay Shaw and everybody in between, you don't come up with any of these fucking names. It's really simple. Really simple, okay? Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, William Seymour, Sergio Arcacha, and Emilio Santana, Kerry Thornley, conspirators in Dallas, directly connected with the central hub being David Ferry, one of the shooters on the knoll, right? And then you have the other connections from Dave Yaris, Lenny Patrick, and those guys, Robert Bernard Baker, who was up on the overpass, and then you have like the shooter on the knoll, technically Jack Valente, who was ultimately recruited through Traficante, with his CI connection being QJ Wynn, Jean-Pierre Lafitte, right? So where the fuck does Carlos Quiroga fit into any of that? Nowhere. Where do 3/4 of the names that get thrown out in the Kennedy assassination fit into that hierarchy that I just laid out? Because once you get to Clay Shaw, you're connected directly to Bloomfield and Permindex and then the Israelis. So there's no fucking room for any of these anti-Castro Cubans. The anti-Castro Cuban situation is a smokescreen, right? Like, these fucking people did not care about Cuba. All right? Cuba was a smokescreen because we know that after the Bay of Pigs, the CIA continued to use Cuba as a jumping off point for their smuggling operations, which went to Haiti and then over to Africa and Israel and Europe, right? So Cuba was in the mix the whole time. The whole legends about the million attempts on Castro is pure bullshit. You know how many attempts on Castro I think there were? 0. Okay? He was our guy the whole time. Like, I don't know what the fuck people delude themselves when they read history, not understanding the real fucking story behind everything. All right. I'm starting to go off on tangents, which means my mind is slipping, which means we're going to wrap this up here pretty soon, but let me continue a little bit longer. Did he say who the other man in the plane was with Carlos, a Caucasian? What was Carlos? He was Spanish. He was a Cuban exile. Did he say he'd ever known these two men before? Yes. Did he say where? Here in New Orleans. What did he say? Well, he felt that Kennedy was selling out to the communists. That Kennedy was selling out. Well, that's repeated twice. You say that he indicated that he knew this Carlos here in New Orleans. In what connection? How well or where? He didn't say. At that time, the whole thing didn't really mean too much to me when you've got to remember I was in the homosexual underground and I was too busy trying to have fun and hustle a buck. Still, I wasn't really too interested because I really couldn't care less. I mean, at this particular stage of the game, he was under the influence when he would talk. He was always extremely frightened when he was sober, extremely frightened. Did he ever tell you how he got to Houston or what he did after the plane didn't show up? He told me he drove. And this would happen after the plane didn't show up. I don't believe I told you that, Steve. I don't recall now how he told me he came back. He drove back. Okay, that might be the only damn true thing that he said, because David Ferry did drive back because he was in Dallas. He leaves from the Belmont address in Fort Worth, the same address that Donald Wayne House got arrested at, and what's his name? His buddy. So he goes from there, and he ends up leaving, and he goes right to Hammond, right? So he never goes to Houston like we covered over the past couple days. He goes and stays with Thomas Compton, and then he's busted by Frank J. Chalona, and then he goes down to Galveston on the 23rd, right? So on the 22nd, like this whole time, he never went to Houston. He bypassed Houston, he went to Galveston, and then he had to drive right back up to get there at 5:30 in the morning to meet with Thomas Compton, right? So we can say with certainty, none of this happened. This is all bullshit, and Garrison knew it, as was pointed out in the previous paragraph, right? Did he go down to Houston with anyone? Yeah, 3 of them. What was their purpose? He claimed he went to, and I find this hard to swallow, that anyone would go to Houston in November from New Orleans to ice skate, because I'm sure you must have an ice skating rink here. I think he made that up. An ice skating rink in Houston? It's not. It's hot in Houston in November. Who were the men who went with him? Well, this one I mentioned to you, Terry Lendfork. Terry Lendfork, and who are the others? Inaudible. I don't know the name Terry Lendfork. Okay. Now you say when you first got down here leaving Bogalusa, you checked into a hotel near the Continental Trailways. According to the street caddy corner this way or caddy corner that way, it had no sign, I mean no name, just hotel. Hotel, it had to have a name. Of course, it would be in the VA records. The VA would have it. Why would they have it? Because they had to pick up my luggage. You were there the entire time you were here? Yeah, I was there the entire time, except for when I would visit other places. I stayed there just about the entire time, I would say. Did you meet anyone at the location? Any names that you can recall? David came up there after you met him. After I met him, I didn't meet anyone there. When I first went there, no, because I didn't know where I was going. I'd never been to New Orleans. What did you do with yourself when you first? The first thing I did was head toward, after I was admitted to the hotel, was headed towards Bourbon Street. Everybody heard about Bourbon Street, so that's how I accidentally found Dixie's, Lafitte's, and every place else. You say you first met David Ferry in Dixie's. Is this correct? Yes. Were you with anyone at the time? No, I was still just new. You really can't say you were there with anyone. You know, bar places, just talking. In other words, no one actually had gone to the place with you. No, I didn't know anyone in New Orleans. How long after you arrived here did you meet Ferry? The very next day, you see. The first night I went out, and then the next afternoon, you say he was with 2 boys. Yes. Do you remember their names? No, Mr. Alcock. I don't remember their names because their names are something they just don't use too freely. Yeah, I can understand that in this particular world. Do you recognize their pictures today? Would you recognize their pictures if you saw them? Sure, I remember. I remember one in particular. What did he look like? He was a very handsome young fellow. He had brownish blonde hair. He was about 6 foot tall. How old did you say he was? I don't know. He appeared to be under the age to be in a bar. Did you recognize the man in the picture here? That's the man with whom David Ferry constantly referred to as Kerry Thornley. All right. So, despite the fact that David Ferry denied knowing Kerry Thornley and all that nonsense, we obviously have the relationship between Kerry Thornley and David Ferry. And here we have it confirmed by Raymond Broshears in 1965. And this person here, that is Kerry Thornley. Where did you meet him? At Lafitte's in Exile. And I don't know what he always maintained that he was not a homosexual. That's somewhat true. I mean, when you go through the files, you'll find that he definitely did some sexual shit with David Ferrie. He was filmed masturbating for David Ferrie. So yeah, it's not that he wasn't a homosexual. He was probably, bi or whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? What is all this mystique in this damn office? That's Broshears asking. They would just rather not discuss things in front of that, that don't pertain to you or me. Now let's look at this boy here in this photograph. Do you recognize him? Inaudible. Who is that? I don't know his name, but I know him. Where did you meet him? Where did you meet this boy? Here in New Orleans. That's one of David Ferrie's boys. Did you recognize that boy right there? I don't know particularly. David knew this boy. I'd seen him around. David knew this person, but you never saw him? I've never seen him. You asked me if I knew him, and I said no. Do you remember where you saw him? It had to be in one of the bars. What is this? Who was on first? And you don't remember this boy's name, but you do remember. I can't say anything on the grounds of being criminally intimidated. Do you remember where you saw him? With David Ferrie, yes. So I'm putting together, this is probably like Alvin Bobu or Leighton Martins, who were still really tight with David Ferrie in 65. Do you remember what building it was, in a bar or in a house? No, this was kind of a hamburger place. The first time I saw him. Now, this was not one of the two boys. He bears a strong resemblance to one of the two boys, but this was not one of the two boys. But this boy I knew, but I cannot tell you how well I knew him. Leighton Martins, does that name ring a bell with you? If his nickname is Marty, then that's him. If his nickname is not Marty, that's not him. Okay, that's a CIA anti-interrogation technique he's using there. Do you reckon? So basically, Broshears starts off this conversation being very upfront with information, if you'll notice. But there's a sharp turn all of a sudden. Now he's being defensive. Now he's intentionally being obtuse when it comes to laying out the facts that he's trying to present. Something here happened to Broshears during this interview. And he starts to want to hold on to information. I don't know if he felt insulted. He might have felt insulted. Who knows? But something pivoted for him here. Now I'm going to show you a photograph of many boys lined up in different rows. Do you recognize any of those? In the front of the second line, do you remember where you saw him or what his real name was? Inaudible. Oh, I see. I can't say that I saw him here, but see, there was a name, but they left the name out, right? I can't say that I saw him here. His face is terribly familiar. Do you know his name? No. Okay, here's another one. This looks like a Dr. Thomas A. Beckham. Okay, just remember, Thomas Beckham is a low-life fucking schmuck ex-Marine, low-level CIA guy. Not a doctor, okay? He ends up opening a fake church going by the fake name of Reverend Mark Evans, okay? So he's not a doctor. It just irritates me when he keeps being referred to this way. How did you know Dr. Beckham? How do I know Dr. Beckham? Yeah. I really don't know how I got to know him. And he laughs. He contacted me and wanted to know if I wanted to be part of his organization. You've seen the correspondence. So Beckham reaches out to Broshears out of the blue to see if he wants to be part of his organization, right? This is the CIA networking going on, right? What was the organization called? The American Academy of Professional Art at college in Omaha, which I checked the chief of police, and something is redacted there and does not exist except on paper. Legally, it does exist. I must say this. Legally, it does exist. So Beckham, we'll do it. Actually, now that I see this stuff in here, we'll get to Beckham here in the next week or two once we get through Broshears. Beckham's a funny one. These guys are really so dumb. And like the CIA, man, they just recruited like jerk-offs off the street sometimes because they knew people, right? It's really fucking weird. But the amount of slippage that came from these guys who were directly involved with these core assassination guys is laughable. All right, so getting back to your first meeting with Ferrie, did you go off with him that night anywhere, that first night? He wanted to. Did you? No, just around the bars and later on in the evening, if you mean a hotel or apartment, nothing like that. Later on in the evening, I drifted back over in this guy Clay, as he called him Clara, and it made him mad when he would do it. Okay, gotcha. So David would call Clay Shaw Clara, and Clay Shaw would get pissed. That's funny. David, too much for this guy. Something's redacted there. David redacted too much for this guy. He was not that. It appeared to me that he had on makeup, and I hear that all men down in redacted wear earrings, so that didn't shock me. So and then there's a long redaction here, And it says, his shirt and everything, and David asked me if I wanted to go with him. The first night you met David, you also met Clara, or Clay Shaw. What is known to you as Clay Shaw? What was he introduced to you that first night? Clara? He wasn't introduced to me. That's just what he was called, and he resented it greatly. Believe me, he resented it. He was introduced to me as a very important person, a very nice person, and then he said something to me about Butch, something redacted or something of that nature. And then later on, when we were eating up, supposed to be eating at the bar, I don't drink, by the way, I just drink Cokes, he patted me on the rear, and I warned him. I said, don't do that again. I don't care who you are. I made quite a scene. Who are you? Who in the hell are you? I mean, I don't really know him. Freak. I let him have it too. I mean, so to speak, verbally. And he said he was only teasing, and then did it again. And when he did smack all up, right alongside the head, and he apologized. So if he smacks Clay Shaw upside the head, and Clay Shaw apologizes, the next time we got together, he apologized. When he passed by, he dropped a $5 bill, like I was a poor pauper. That was his way of apologizing to people. When David introduced him to me, you didn't see him call him by any other name, did he? Here is, or I want to say, meet. This was his way. Let me see, or something like that. As I recall, the first time he used Clara, he never used the name Shaw, never once in that particular thing. In talking with him is his only time he mentioned the word Clay Shaw, when he mentioned Hale Boggs, and had that particular hatred for him. What about Hale Boggs? He had a hatred for Clay Shaw too, because I kind of suspect the way he discussed those films, that Clay Shaw had access to those films, or he had those films. I can't prove it. What about the name Bertrand? Inaudible. What about the name Bertrand? He never used the name Bertrand, only the name Bert. Did you ever go to his apartment? No, I went to several places here in New Orleans. Apartment, but never that were identified as David Ferry's apartment or Clay Shaw's. You never spent any time in Ferry's apartment. The only time I spent with Ferry was when Ferry stayed with me in my apartment, and this was when he had things he had claimed belonged to Lee Harvey Oswald, and he claimed that he loved Lee, and all that kind of bull. You told me that he had come in contact with some of the possessions of Lee Harvey Oswald that belonged a hat it's like a hunter's cap, gray, and it had LH on the front, and he claimed it belonged to Lee Oswald. So there's a big redaction here, and then says, which he claimed to belong to Lee Harvey Oswald. It had Lee written on it, engraved on it, and he said that he had a lot more of these, but Clay has been buying them from me. So I strongly suspect this is one of the ways he got money. It's a weird situation. Blackmail's a weird situation. He said one time, these are the only thing that's keeping me alive. These possessions? Yeah. Did he ever make a comment about Lee Harvey Oswald? I mentioned it earlier. He said he did not kill John Kennedy. Did he ever make a comment about Lee Harvey Oswald and his personal relationship with Oswald? Yes. Can you something of what that says, of what that was? Not on tape. And then there's a pause in the tape. David has told me numerous times that Kerry Thornley maintains he's not a homosexual. But I say he is. And I say to the whole world, if he's not a homosexual, why was he in homosexual bars? Why? And then something is redacted and says, if he's not. Why redacted if he's not? I was like, I want to know what that redaction is. Why did he suck Dave's dick if he's not? It's probably something along those lines. And his resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald is rather frightening. Okay, I'm going to read this whole paragraph again because it's key. David has told me numerous times that Kerry Thornley maintains he's not a homosexual, but I say that he is. And I say to the whole world, if he's not a homosexual, then why is he in homosexual bars? Why redacted if he is not? And his resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald is rather frightening. This David pointed out. David pointed that out to you. Yes. So I had told him that there was this in one of these underground papers last week in Los Angeles, and I remember it said from Kerry Thornley, and I didn't read it, but I said to him, is Kerry Thornley in Los Angeles? Because I got a little worried, and he told me, no, he's in Florida, Tampa. I hope that's far enough away. Let's see, you met with Shaw and Ferry on one occasion on the first night. Now, did you have another occasion when you met? Second and third. All right, now is the second time. Who was present? All right, so now that we're going to be getting into a break and into a second story, I'm going to call it for the day and pick this up. Let me think. Not tomorrow. I'm going to take tomorrow off because I'm working on my chapter on Carrie Thornley, which needs to get done this month. And so I will pick this up on Wednesday. Wednesday morning we will continue. We are on page 29 of 108. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all on Wednesday.